Thragg is not just the strongest character in Invincible. This guy is also extremely smart and manipulative. He manipulated Oliver, Omni-Man, Alan, and even the pure-blooded Viltrumites who were under his rule. You guys might not be familiar with his story and what he does, so let's start from the beginning. So, from the moment he was born, Thragg was engineered to be the ultimate Viltrumite, both in physical power and tactical intelligence. As the son of one of Emperor Argyl's closest advisors, his very existence was the result of the Viltrumite Empire's strict eugenics program. Unlike other Viltrumites, who were naturally strong and battle-hardened, Thragg was subjected to an even more rigorous training regime. This was not just about brute strength, it was a deliberate effort to craft the most dangerous and capable leader in Viltrumite history. This training shaped him into not only the strongest warrior among his people, but also their most cunning tactician. His loyalty to Lord Argyl was absolute, and he followed him unquestioningly, until Argyl's assassination threw the Empire into disarray. Most Viltrumites would have responded with reckless violence, seeking immediate vengeance. However, Thragg understood that brute force alone would not restore order. Instead, he bided his time, maneuvering himself into a position of leadership. When the Scourge virus devastated the Viltrumites, wiping out 99.9% of their population, many would have seen it as the end of their species. Instead, Thragg saw an opportunity. He seized control of the remnants of the Empire and devised a long-term survival strategy. Knowing that his people could no longer afford to fight wars as they once had, he chose to rule from the shadows. By carefully controlling the perception of Viltrumite strength, he ensured that their dwindling numbers remained an unspoken advantage rather than a weakness. Rather than engaging in constant battle, Thragg maintained the illusion of an unstoppable empire while secretly searching for ways to rebuild. This was a masterstroke of leadership. While lesser warlords might have thrown their forces into unwinnable battles, Thragg manipulated events to keep the Viltrumites feared and relevant. Everything changed when Thragg learned of Earth, and more importantly, of Nolan's defection to the Coalition of Planets. He immediately recognized that his previous strategy of ruling from the shadows was no longer viable. The Coalition had become too powerful, and Nolan's betrayal meant that Thragg's secrecy would only delay the inevitable. Thragg's response was swift and calculated. Instead of reacting emotionally to the betrayal, he took decisive action. He recalled all scattered Viltrumite forces, consolidating his power for a single, devastating strike. Unlike the Coalition, which had to balance political concerns and multiple fronts, Thragg had the luxury of complete control over his forces. This allowed him to commit everything to a single, well-planned offensive strike. One of Thragg's most brilliant moves was his willingness to make sacrifices for the greater goal. When he sent Conquest to fight Nolan and his sons, it was not because he expected Conquest to win, it was because he knew that battle would delay the Coalition's ability to react. Conquest's mission was not victory, but disruption, and in that, he succeeded. At the same time, Thragg sent his non-Viltrumite troops on reckless assaults against outer Coalition worlds. On the surface, this might have seemed wasteful, but it was a calculated distraction. These attacks forced the Coalition to spread their forces thin, drawing their attention away from the true target, Talescria, the heart of their power. Thragg's final move was perhaps his most cunning. Using his deepest placed spy within the Coalition, he sabotaged Talescria's warning systems just before the assault began. This ensured that when the Viltrumites finally struck, they did so with maximum impact, catching the Coalition at its weakest moment. While many warlords might have led the charge themselves, Thragg remained aboard the Viltrumite mothership, overseeing the battle with cold precision. This was not an act of cowardice, it was strategic. He understood that his greatest value was not as a frontline fighter, but as the mastermind directing the battle. The initial attack was a testament to his planning. The Viltrumite warriors, despite their dwindling numbers, struck with devastating efficiency. Their overwhelming strength turned the Coalition's capital into a bloodbath, catching their enemies off guard. Thragg's calculated use of fear and brutality shattered morale. His forces didn't just aim to defeat the Coalition, they aimed to terrify them into submission. The heroes of the Coalition, Alan the Alien, Tech Jacket, and even the legendary Theodus, threw themselves into the fight, but against Thragg's elite warriors, they were outmatched. The battle unfolded exactly as he had predicted, with the Viltrumites cutting through their enemies like a scythe through tall grass, and their victory seemed inevitable. What Thragg did not anticipate was the intervention of Nolan and his sons, Mark and Oliver. Their sudden arrival turned the tide of battle, rallying the broken coalition forces into a desperate but effective counterattack. The sheer power of the Graysons, bolstered by their hybrid nature and unwavering determination, proved to be a factor Thragg had underestimated. As he watched from the mothership, Thragg's frustration grew. Unlike his enemies, he was not prone to rash emotional outbursts, but this moment challenged even his legendary composure. The Graysons were not just physically formidable, they were symbolic. Their presence reinvigorated the coalition and unified them under a single purpose: to drive the Viltrumites back. Despite his careful planning, the unexpected resistance forced him into a position he rarely found himself in, reacting rather than controlling. When Invincible himself destroyed one of the last Viltrumite command ships, Thragg recognized that victory was no longer possible. He did not allow pride to cloud his judgment. Instead, he did what any truly intelligent leader would do: he cut his losses. Many leaders, especially those as powerful as Thragg, would have refused to accept defeat, leading their forces into a futile last stand. But Thragg was not like most conquerors. He understood that true leadership meant knowing when to fight and when to retreat. Rather than risk total annihilation or capture, he made a swift and calculated decision. The Viltrumites would fall back to their last defensible position, their ruined homeworld, Viltrum itself. The planet, though ravaged by the Scourge virus and previous conflicts, was still a near impenetrable stronghold. From there, he could regroup, rebuild, and prepare for the next stage of his plan. This retreat was not a failure, it was a tactical move. Thragg was not interested in short-term victories. He was playing a long game, one where survival and long-term dominance mattered more than a single battle. He knew that as long as the Viltrumite race endured, the war was not over. Soon, the remnants of the coalition launched a desperate counter-offensive attack. A small but elite group of the most powerful warriors in the universe attempted to infiltrate Viltrum's airspace, hoping to set up an ambush and catch the Viltrumites in a vulnerable state. But once again, Thragg proved why he was the most cunning tactician in the galaxy. He anticipated that the coalition would not allow them time to regroup, and rather than waiting to be attacked, he turned the tables on them. As soon as the coalition forces entered Viltrum's atmosphere, Thragg and his surviving warriors burst from the planet's surface and struck with overwhelming ferocity. The ambushers became the ambushed, and what followed was one of the bloodiest battles in Viltrumite history. The battle was not a drawn-out war of attrition, but a short, decisive slaughter. The Viltrumites fought like a cornered beast, desperate but deadly. Casualties piled up on both sides, and by the time the dust settled, the Viltrumite race had been reduced to barely 30 survivors. But the cost was even greater than lives lost. Their very homeworld, Viltrum, was obliterated in the chaos. For any other ruler, such devastation would have marked the end of their empire. But for Thragg, it was simply another obstacle to overcome. He understood that the Viltrumite Empire was never about territory, it was about its people. If the Viltrumites lived, their legacy endured it, and he was determined to ensure their survival at any cost. Amidst the carnage, Thragg personally confronted the coalition's greatest champions, ensuring that their strongest leaders would not leave the battlefield alive. He beheaded Thedas, the Viltrumite traitor who had betrayed his own people to form the coalition of planets. Thragg's execution of Thedas was more than vengeance, it was a statement. By killing Thedas himself, he demonstrated that betrayal would never go unpunished, and that the Viltrumites, though weakened, were still a force to be feared. Then, he hurled the mighty battle beast into the void of space, removing one of the most formidable warriors from the battlefield. It was a display of both strength and tactical prowess. Rather than waste time in prolonged combat, he neutralized the threat efficiently. Next, he personally took on the Grayson family, proving beyond doubt that he was superior to all of them combined. He eviscerated Nolan, ripped Oliver apart, and left Invincible battered and unconscious. This was not just about eliminating enemies, it was about breaking the spirit of the coalition's greatest warriors. Despite his overwhelming power, Thragg did something unexpected. He chose not to finish off the Grayson family. It would have been easy to end their lives, erasing the greatest threats to Viltrumite dominance. But Thragg was not just a conqueror, he was a leader with a long-term vision. His decision to spare them was not out of mercy, it was a calculated move based on the Viltrumites' dwindling numbers. Even traitors like Nolan and his hybrid sons were valuable assets. Killing them would have been a waste, and deep down, Thragg likely saw the potential for their bloodline to serve the future of his race. Instead of ensuring their deaths, he abandoned them in the cold emptiness of space, knowing that if they survived, their battle would be far from over. But perhaps the most surprising part of Thragg's strategy was his final move. He willingly abandoned the remnants of the Viltrumite Empire, along with all its riches, and set his sights on Earth. Many rulers would have clung to the last vestiges of their former glory, refusing to let go of what they had lost. But Thragg was smarter than that. He understood that the true future of the Viltrumites lay not in rebuilding their shattered empire, but in adaptation. Earth represented something far more valuable than wealth or status. It was a breeding ground for powerful new warriors. With its dense population and human Viltrumite hybrids already proving their potential, it was the perfect place to secure the future of his people. Upon arriving in Earth's orbit, Thragg once again demonstrated his ability to think beyond brute force. Rather than leading his warriors in a last-ditch conquest, he issued a different command, one that showed he was playing the long game. Thragg ordered the remaining Viltrumites to scatter across Earth, embedding themselves within human society. This was not an act of retreat, but rather an act of quiet conquest. By blending in with the locals, the Viltrumites would ensure their survival while also laying the groundwork for a future resurgence. Given their long lifespans, they could afford to be patient. Over generations, their genes would spread, creating an army of powerful hybrids without ever having to wage war. This was a masterstroke in strategy. Thragg understood that direct conflict had nearly driven his people to extinction, and now he was shifting to a more subtle form of domination. One that would allow the Viltrumites to thrive without drawing the coalition's immediate attention. Thragg himself did not immediately follow his warriors to Earth. Instead, he and a small crew remained stationed on the dark side of the moon, using his command ship as a hidden listening post. He knew that the coalition would send a response force, and rather than acting rashly, he chose to wait in complete darkness and silence. For over 2 weeks, Thragg remained motionless, patient as ever. This was not the behavior of a reckless conqueror. It was the strategy of a predator lying in wait. By staying hidden, he controlled the narrative. He would dictate when and how the next encounter would take place, ensuring that he had the upper hand when it came time to negotiate. Eventually, his patience was rewarded. A single coalition ship entered Earth's orbit, carrying Invincible and Nolan. Thragg did not act immediately. He let them land and compose themselves, observing their movements and reactions before making his presence known. He understood that approaching too soon would make him look desperate, and attacking outright would risk another full-scale war. Instead, he let them lower their guard before engaging them on his terms. When Thragg finally revealed himself, Invincible immediately launched into an attack, unleashing his fury upon the Viltrumite leader. But Thragg, as always, remained in control. He withstood the blows without retaliation, demonstrating his sheer physical superiority without escalating the conflict. Instead of responding with violence, he calmly asked for a parley, a move that caught both Nolan and Mark off guard. This was not the reaction of a desperate warlord, but that of a ruler who still had complete confidence in his position. Then he made his offer. The Viltrumites would surrender their claim to the remnants of their empire and cease all hostilities against the coalition. In return, they would be allowed to remain on Earth in peace, free to rebuild their numbers without interference. At first glance, this seemed like a surprising act of diplomacy, but in reality, it was yet another calculated move by Thragg. He knew that the coalition had neither the resources nor the will to launch another prolonged war against the Viltrumites, especially now that they were scattered across Earth. By framing his proposal as a peaceful resolution, he put the coalition in a difficult position. Thragg's offer was not simply an olive branch, it was an ultimatum. If the coalition refused to accept his terms, the consequences would be catastrophic. He made it clear that the Viltrumites, despite their reduced numbers, were still strong enough to raise the Earth if they so desired. This was the brilliance of Thragg's gambit. He presented his enemies with a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. The coalition could either accept his terms and allow the Viltrumites to integrate into human society, or they could risk the complete destruction of Earth, a price far too steep to pay. It was the ultimate demonstration of power through diplomacy. Thragg had lost the war, yet he was still able to dictate the terms of its resolution. He had been forced to abandon the Viltrumite Empire, but in exchange, he secured a foothold on Earth, a planet rich with potential for his people's resurgence. Despite his deep misgivings, Invincible was forced to consider the harsh reality of the situation. He had already witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by just one Viltrumite. Conquest had nearly torn Earth apart single-handedly. Worse still, he had seen an entire planet fall to the rampage of his extra-dimensional duplicates. Now, faced with the prospect of 30 full-blooded adult Viltrumites waging war against Earth, he knew that there was no real alternative. Even with the coalition's backing, the planet stood no chance of survival if hostilities resumed. In the end, Invincible had no choice but to accept Thragg's terms. The treaty was agreed upon and the war was officially over, but in reality, Thragg had won far more than he had lost. While the coalition saw it as an end to conflict, Thragg saw it as a strategic retreat, one that ensured his people's survival and set them up for long-term domination through quiet assimilation. Pleased with how events had unfolded, Thragg left the Graysons behind in a burst of speed, vowing never to interfere with them again. To an outside observer, it might have seemed like the Viltrumite warlord had finally conceded and accepted peace, but Thragg did not trust the coalition. Despite the treaty, he knew that their leaders, especially Alan the alien, could not be relied upon to keep their word. He had seen firsthand how the coalition operated, using treachery, sabotage, and biological warfare to weaken the Viltrumites. There was no reason to believe they would suddenly abandon such tactics just because a peace agreement had been signed. So, instead of settling into a quiet existence, Thragg remained on high alert. He returned to his command ship on the dark side of the moon, resuming his silent vigil over Earth. While the Viltrumites on the planet integrated into human society, Thragg kept watch, waiting for the inevitable betrayal. His instincts were proven right almost immediately. When Nolan and his wife departed Earth aboard a coalition vessel, Thragg wasn't surprised. In fact, he had anticipated it. Nolan, despite his Viltrumite blood, had aligned himself with the coalition and would never truly side with his own kind. His departure only reinforced what Thragg already knew. Earth was still a battleground, and the coalition was not finished with them yet. For the next month, Thragg remained patient, continuing to scan the darkness of space. He knew it was only a matter of time before the coalition made their next move, and then it happened. Alan, who is coalition's leader, approached Earth, this time with clear intent. Thragg immediately took notice, recognizing that this was no routine visit. He watched as Invincible soared into the sky to greet them, meeting with his half-brother Oliver and Alan. Thragg had no need to intervene, at least, not yet. Instead, he focused on monitoring their conversation, listening for the first sign of treachery, and then he heard it. Alan, the supposed champion of peace, revealed the true purpose of his return. He had come bearing a perfected sample of the dreaded Scourge virus, the same biological weapon that had nearly wiped the Viltrumites from existence in the past. His plan was as ruthless as it was effective. He would release the virus upon Earth's unsuspecting population, ensuring that the hidden Viltrumites and their hybrid offspring would be eradicated before they could rise to power. Thragg's suspicions had been confirmed. The coalition had never intended to honor the treaty. They had simply been biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But what they had failed to realize was that Thragg was always watching. Without hesitation, Thragg abandoned his silent perch on the moon, rocketing across the void of space with terrifying speed. The time for patience had ended, now he would confront the Coalition directly. When Thragg arrived on the battlefield, he found that Invincible was struggling against Alan and Oliver. The two Coalition warriors had the upper hand, and it was clear that Invincible was fighting a losing battle. But the moment Thragg entered the fray, everything changed. His sheer presence alone was enough to bring the fight to a sudden halt. No one, not Alan, not Oliver, not even Invincible, was willing to continue hostilities in the face of the strongest Viltrumite in existence. This was yet another demonstration of Thragg's mastery of psychological warfare. He knew that his physical strength made him an overwhelming threat, but he also understood the power of fear. By simply showing up, he forced his enemies to reconsider their actions, turning a battle that was slipping out of his control into a negotiation on his terms. Rather than engage in outright combat, Thragg once again relied on diplomacy. He presented Alan with the same bargain he had previously given to Invincible and Nolan, a peace treaty that would allow the Viltrumites to remain on Earth without interference. However, this time he added a chilling ultimatum. If Alan refused the offer, Thragg would not only reject diplomacy, he would kill Alan and his allies on the spot. This was a brilliant tactical move. Thragg had already assessed the situation and knew that Alan was beginning to doubt his own plan. The virus was too unpredictable, and its potential to wipe out both Viltrumites and humans made it a dangerous gamble. By forcing Alan to make a decision in the heat of the moment, Thragg exploited his uncertainty and manipulated him into conceding. In the end, Alan accepted the deal. Once again, Thragg had outmaneuvered the Coalition, securing another victory without lifting a finger. Just as the situation seemed to be under control, a new complication arose. The Guardians of the Globe arrived on the battlefield, engaging them in combat. Despite his ruthlessness, Thragg demonstrated an extraordinary level of self-control. Unlike his usual brutal approach to combat, he made a conscious effort not to maim or kill the Earth's defenders. This was not an act of mercy, but a calculated decision, one that kept the fragile peace from shattering completely. However, despite his restraint, a major disaster struck. In the chaos of battle, Invincible himself was exposed to the deadly Scourge virus. This unexpected turn of events forced all sides to immediately cease hostilities. The fighting stopped, and all combatants, including the Viltrumites, the Coalition, and the Guardians, turned their attention to the fate of the infected hero. Thragg, ever the strategist, wasted no time in taking control of the situation. With Invincible's life hanging in the balance, he proposed yet another deal, this time to Cecil Stedman, the leader of the Global Defense Agency. Thragg promised to quarantine the fallen hero, ensuring his recovery and preventing the virus from spreading any further. In doing so, he not only prevented further conflict, but also positioned himself as a responsible leader, one who was willing to work with Earth's protectors rather than against them. This move had multiple benefits, as it reinforced the Viltrumites' legitimacy on Earth. By taking responsibility for Invincible's care, Thragg proved that his people were not reckless conquerors, but a civilization capable of diplomacy and cooperation. It ensured that the Viltrumites remained in a position of power. By keeping Invincible under his watch, Thragg maintained leverage over both the Coalition and Earth's heroes. It also diffused the immediate threat of war. With a major crisis unfolding, neither the Coalition nor the Guardians could afford to restart hostilities. During this time, one of Thragg's medical examiners made a startling discovery while processing Invincible's blood. Invincible, Mark Grayson, was a grandson of Argyle and a legitimate heir to the Empire. The revelation that Mark Grayson is the grandson of Argyle and a legitimate heir to the Empire presents an immediate and dangerous problem. If this information were to spread, Mark could be seen as the rightful ruler, challenging Thragg's authority. Rather than panic or make a rash decision, Thragg calmly ensures that the secret dies with the examiner. His brutal efficiency, gruesomely murdering the examiner after confirming that no one else knew, demonstrates his ability to act with cold logic. This move is not just about self-preservation, it's about preserving his version of the Viltrumite Empire. To Thragg, Mark is a traitor and unworthy of leadership. Thragg's next course of action is entirely in line with his pragmatic ruthlessness. Rather than risk Mark waking up and causing problems in the future, Thragg decides to eliminate him immediately. He coldly moves to strangle the comatose hero, seeing this as the simplest and most efficient solution. This shows Thragg's willingness to strike at the right moment. He doesn't seek a grand battle or a symbolic execution. He simply does what needs to be done in the most straightforward way possible. However, his plan is interrupted by Dinosaurus, one of Mark's most unpredictable allies. Dinosaurus launches a surprise attack on Thragg, using a calculated strategy to weaken him. He synchronizes his explosions with his own low heartbeat, attempting to create an opening. However, Thragg barely acknowledges the attack. Dinosaurus' claws break against Thragg's skin, his teeth shatter when he tries to bite him, and Thragg effortlessly overpowers him, pummeling him into submission. But still, Dinosaurs manages to escape with Mark when Thragg gets distracted by more explosions in his ship. Later, when the Flaxons invade London, one of Thragg's top officers, Craig, interferes in the battle because someone there is carrying his child. Thragg is disgusted by Craig's emotional attachment to humans, seeing it as weakness. He reprimands Craig, making it clear that Viltrumites must not mix with humanity or interfere with their affairs. When he later calls a meeting of the remaining Viltrumites, he doubles down on this philosophy. He reprimands Lucan, Craig, and Anissa for disobeying his orders. His disgust at Craig and Lucan's attachment to humans leads him to banish them outright. This isn't just about punishing insubordination, it's about purging weakness from the Viltrumite ranks. Thragg wants only the strongest, most loyal warriors in his empire. If someone shows even a hint of sentimentality, he sees them as a liability. Later, upon discovering that Nolan has returned to Earth and is stationed on the moon, Thragg sees it as an opportunity to eliminate him. Thragg demands Nolan fight him, but Nolan refuses, showing his commitment to changing Viltrumite culture. This only enrages Thragg more, as he sees this as a weakness. In his mind, a true Viltrumite ruler should never back down from a fight. Thragg, ever the opportunist, brutally beats Nolan and prepares to kill him, until his own people turn on him. This moment is pivotal. The same warriors who once followed Thragg without question now betray him upon learning Nolan's true lineage. This is one of the few moments in Invincible where Thragg is truly outmaneuvered. Craig, Anissa, Lucan, and Thula, some of his most loyal soldiers, turn against him. They attempt to kill him outright, which speaks volumes about how much they believe in Nolan's vision for the future. Thragg is only spared because Nolan himself calls for mercy. This betrayal is a massive blow to Thragg, not just physically, but psychologically. He has always ruled with absolute control, believing that his strength made him unquestionable. Yet in this moment, his leadership crumbles, and he finds himself in chains. In a rare moment, Thragg is not in control of his fate. He is imprisoned, left to argue with Nolan, but rather than begging for his life, he demands that Nolan kill him. But instead, Nolan decided to exile him. While most would see exile as a death sentence, Thragg turns it into an opportunity. He chooses the planet Thraxa strategically. It's a planet that allows him to remain isolated while also giving him access to a replenishable population. Thragg doesn't simply wait for a chance at revenge, he creates it. He mates with thousands of Thraxan females, ensuring that he produces thousands of hybrid children. This is a brilliant long-term strategy. He's not just rebuilding an army, he's engineering one. His children will be loyal to him above all else, ensuring that when the time comes, he has an army that worships him. Thragg's patience is rewarded with one final challenge, Battle Beast. The coalition sends their most ferocious warrior to eliminate him, but rather than being intimidated, Thragg sees this as a test. Their duel rages for weeks, with no clear victor in sight. However, Thragg ultimately prevails, killing Battle Beast in an act of pure dominance. Before dying, Battle Beast thanks Thragg as if he finally found the battle he had been searching for his whole life. But this victory comes at a price. Thragg succumbs to his wounds and loses consciousness. Even in victory, he barely survives, proving just how monumental this battle was. Thragg then becomes a fugitive, but unlike most who run, he is not hiding, he is waiting. With his Thraxan warriors, women, and his many children, he takes to the cosmos, evading coalition forces. He does not attack yet. Instead, he bides his time, allowing his forces to grow in number and strength. He knows that striking too soon would be foolish. Instead, he vanishes into the stars, preparing for his next conquest. After 5 years, by the time Mark Grayson returns from the alternate timeline, Thragg has already solidified his new Viltrumite empire. His patience has once again paid off. His children have matured, his forces have grown, and he is ready to strike. Thragg's first move is calculated. He doesn't launch a full-scale invasion of the coalition immediately. Instead, he sends his children to attack planets that are under the protection of the coalition. He wants to see how they react, how quickly they mobilize, and what their weaknesses are. By using his children, he's making a statement. His bloodline is strong, and the Viltrumites are returning. The coalition now knows that he has an entire generation of warriors bred for battle. When Oliver, who has been acting as a double agent, contacts Thragg, he doesn't give any valid information to him. Instead, he is able to get info about Mark and Eve from Oliver and then plans his next move accordingly. Thragg doesn't confront Mark personally at first. He orders Onan and Ursel to assassinate him. When Oliver tries to meet Thragg again, this time begging for Mark's life, Thragg shows his true ruthlessness. He informs Oliver that he has already located Mark and will kill his entire family. This is the moment where Thragg fully embraces his role as the ultimate villain. There is no more deception, no more strategy. He doesn't need a spy anymore. He simply states his plan and follows through. Thragg grabs Mark's daughter, Terra, proving that he has no limits when it comes to warfare. When Oliver intervenes to save Terra, Thragg impales him without hesitation and kills him right in front of her. When Mark retaliates by holding Onan hostage, Thragg does not waver. Unlike many villains, he does not beg for his child's life or negotiate. When Mark kills Onan, Thragg does not grieve. He immediately attacks Mark with full force. Thragg doesn't just beat Mark, he rips him in half. This isn't just about winning, it's about making a statement. Thragg has spent his entire life proving that he is the strongest Viltrumite. By tearing Mark Grayson apart, he proves beyond all doubt that he is superior. After seemingly witnessing Ursel kill Eve, he leaves Terra to die. He doesn't even consider her a threat. He assumes she won't survive without protection, and this is the one mistake that will cost him a lot. So Thragg's conquest continues relentlessly. With his army of Thraxan Viltrumite hybrids, he wages war across the cosmos, taking planet after planet, leaving devastation in his wake. The death toll rises, but to Thragg, it is merely the cost of victory. With his forces nearing their final attack on the coalition resistance, he deploys his children to confront Mark Grayson. However, as they engage him in combat, it becomes clear that they are no match for their intended target. One after another, Thragg's children are brutally splattered against Mark, their bodies unable to withstand his strength. Mark, horrified by the senseless slaughter, pleads with them to stop, urging them to see reason before they continue to throw their lives away. Ursel, still loyal to her father's vision, confronts Mark, accusing him of trying to undermine everything they have worked for. But when she turns to Thragg for reassurance, she is met with only cold pragmatism. He seizes her by the throat, his grip unwavering, and tells her that no sacrifice is too great for their mission. He dismisses the fallen hybrids as weaklings who deserve to die, reinforcing his belief that only the strongest deserve to survive. The final battle erupts with the full force of war, but at its heart stands the inevitable clash between Thragg and Nolan. As they exchange blow after devastating blow, it is evident that despite Nolan's best efforts, he is outmatched. Thragg's power proves overwhelming as he brutally headbutts Nolan's hand, shattering it instantly. Mark attempts to intervene, desperate to save his father from Thragg's wrath, but Thragg effortlessly hurls him aside, declaring that he will deal with Mark after he finishes off Nolan. Returning to his prey, he is met with one last act of defiance. Nolan, refusing to cower, drives his head into Thragg's face. It does nothing to slow the Viltrumite warlord, who prepares his killing move. In a final desperate maneuver, Nolan manages to shift Thragg's aim slightly, preventing a direct strike to his heart. However, it is not enough to save him. With a single, devastating swipe, Thragg tears through Nolan's chest, ripping his heart from his body and leaving him to die. Mark, consumed with fury at the sight of his father's brutal execution, charges at Thragg with everything he has. Thragg, unfazed, grabs him once more and throws him aside, summoning his remaining children to overwhelm Mark. In a gruesome display of cruelty, Thragg begins hurling his own offspring at Mark as living projectiles, but instead of injuring Mark, their fragile bodies burst on impact, staining him in the blood of his half-siblings. Sickened by Thragg's utter disregard for his own kin, Mark seizes the warlord and, in a moment of sheer, desperate determination, drags both of them into the blazing inferno of the sun. The two warriors clash within the searing heat of the sun, their bodies igniting and burning with every second. Even as the solar fire consumes them, they continue to trade blows, neither willing to concede. As they fight, Mark demands to know what truly drives Thragg, what justifies the endless bloodshed and destruction he has caused. Thragg, his skin charring and flaking away under the immense heat, answers with unwavering conviction. For him, this was never about simple conquest, it was about revenge. Revenge against Mark's bloodline, the bloodline that robbed him of his rightful claim to the Viltrumite Empire, the throne he believed was his by birthright. In his mind, everything he had done, every life he had taken, every atrocity he had committed was for the sake of reclaiming what had been stolen from him. When Thragg tries to make an escape, Mark refuses to let him go, grabbing hold of him and dragging them both into the core of the sun. As they descend deeper, the unimaginable heat begins to burn away their flesh, reducing them to nothing more than charred remnants of their former selves. The overwhelming pain would have been enough to kill any lesser being, but both Mark and Thragg endure, their sheer Viltrumite resilience keeping them alive even as their bodies deteriorate. Despite the agony, Mark doesn't stop talking. Even though Thragg can no longer hear his thoughts, Mark vents his fury, breaking down exactly why Thragg was a failure as both a leader and a Viltrumite. He condemns Thragg for clinging to the old ways, methods that brought the Viltrum Empire to near extinction. He calls out his selfishness, his blind pursuit of dominance, and his unwillingness to adapt. Thragg, in all his arrogance, fought for nothing but his own pride, holding his species back from reaching their true potential. While Thragg saw strength in brutality, Mark saw it in unity and change. And now, Thragg's refusal to evolve would cost him everything. As the battle intensifies, Mark momentarily gains the upper hand when one of Robot's armors, programmed for emergencies, detects his dire condition and flies toward the sun to attach itself to him. For a brief moment, the armor provides some protection, shielding Mark from the sun's unbearable heat while Thragg continues to burn. Enraged, Thragg fights even harder, the two warriors exchanging devastating blows that send out waves of solar fire with each impact. Their clash triggers violent solar flares and explosions from the sun's volatile surface, making the battlefield even more chaotic. But despite the temporary boost from the armor, the overwhelming heat begins to take its toll. The molten energy of the sun is too much, and the robot suit begins to liquefy, melting off Mark's body. Now, with nothing left to shield them, their bodies continue to disintegrate, becoming barely recognizable husks of what they once were. Their eyes are seared shut, their muscles exposed and burning, yet their battle rages on. Every strike sends shockwaves through their bones, and every moment they spend in the sun is another step closer to death. In the fight's final moments, Thragg, realizing he has sustained far more damage than his opponent, lashes out in pure desperation. With the last of his strength, he manages to grab Mark's arms and with a sickening crunch breaks them both. Mark screams in pain, but even with his arms shattered, his resolve does not waver. In a final act of defiance, Mark lunges forward, using his last remaining weapon, his teeth. With the fury of a dying warrior, he clamps down on Thragg's throat and tears it out, ripping through flesh and bone in one decisive, savage motion. Thragg's body goes limp. His reign of terror, his endless struggle to reclaim the Viltrum Empire is finally over. His lifeless corpse drifts into the burning core of the sun, where it is consumed completely, leaving no trace of the warlord who once threatened the universe. Mark, exhausted and on the brink of death, knows he has nothing left. His arms are useless, his body is ruined, and he is moments away from joining Thragg in the sun's embrace. He resigns himself to his fate, accepting that if he must die, at least he has ensured a better future for his people. But just as he begins to drift into unconsciousness, salvation arrives. Alan, having tracked the battle, arrives just in time. Ignoring the risk, he plunges into the sun's outer layers, using his incredible strength to pull Mark free from its grasp. As they escape, Mark barely registers what's happening. His entire body is failing, but he can feel the relief of being pulled into the cold of space. With Thragg now dead, the war is over. His empire, built on cruelty and domination, crumbles in his absence. Without his iron grip, the remaining Viltrumites are finally free to embrace a new future, one not defined by conquest, but by survival, adaptation, and even peace. Under Mark's family's leadership, they move forward, no longer shackled by the outdated beliefs that nearly destroyed them. Thragg was, without a doubt, one of the greatest threats the Invincible universe had ever seen. He was a villain who combined raw power with sharp intelligence, making him a near unstoppable force. His strategic mind, combat skill, and ruthless efficiency made him one of the deadliest enemies Mark Grayson ever faced. However, what truly set Thragg apart was the tragedy of his own downfall. In many ways, he was a relic of a bygone era, an emperor fighting for an empire that no longer needed him. He spent his entire existence believing that the Viltrumite way was the only way, refusing to acknowledge that change was not just necessary, but inevitable. He had every opportunity to evolve, to lead his people into a new era, but instead, he chose destruction.